What happens when one of the world's most neutral nations breaks its silence? Switzerland, a country that has stayed out of wars for over 200 years, just looked directly at the United States and Israel and said, "What you did was wrong." That is not a small statement. That is a diplomatic earthquake. And in the next 15 minutes, I am going to break down exactly what happened, why Switzerland's reaction matters more than most people realize, and what this means for the future of global peace and international law. Stay with me because this story is bigger than most headlines are telling you. Let's start with the facts. The United States and Israel carried out coordinated military strikes against Iran. The details of the targets, the scale of the operation, and the exact timing are still unfolding, but the international response has already begun. Switzerland's foreign ministry released an official statement saying it was, and I quote directly, deeply alarmed by the strikes. Now, that phrase, deeply alarmed, in the language of diplomacy, is extremely strong. Switzerland does not use emotional language lightly. This is a country whose entire foreign policy is built on calm, measured neutrality. The Swiss government went further. They called on all parties to respect international law, including the United Nations Charter. They urged protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. And they reminded the world that the Swiss embassy remains operational, keeping open the door for communication between sides that may no longer be speaking to each other directly. That last point is critical. Switzerland has historically served as a communication bridge between the United States and Iran because the two countries do not have formal diplomatic relations. Switzerland is America's protecting power in Iran. That means Swiss diplomats represent American interests on the ground in Tehran. So when Switzerland speaks, both sides are listening. You might be asking, why does it matter what Switzerland says? They have no military. They are a small country. Why should the world pay attention? Here is why. Switzerland's power is not military, it is moral. For centuries, Switzerland has built its entire international identity around neutrality, humanitarian law, and peaceful dialogue. The Geneva Conventions, the foundation of modern laws of war, were born in Switzerland. The International Committee of the Red Cross is headquartered in Geneva. The United Nations Human Rights Council meets in Geneva. Switzerland is not just a country. It is the home of the rules that the international community agreed to follow. So when Switzerland says the rules were broken, that is not one country criticizing another. That is the keeper of the rulebook saying the game was played unfairly. And when Switzerland specifically invokes the United Nations Charter, they are pointing to Article 2, which prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity of another state, unless it is in self-defense or authorized by the Security Council. The question of whether these strikes qualify as lawful self-defense or whether they crossed a line, is now being debated in capitals around the world. Let's talk about international law, because this is where the real argument lives. The United Nations Charter, signed in 1945, was built on one core principle. Nations should not use military force against each other except in very specific circumstances. The world had just survived 2 world wars. The rules were written in the blood of millions of people. Under the Charter, military force is only permitted in 2 situations: when a country is acting in immediate self-defense against an armed attack, or when the United Nations Security Council authorizes it. Switzerland is essentially asking, which of those 2 conditions was met here? That is a question the United States and Israel will need to answer on the world stage. Now, both countries have strong arguments. They will point to ongoing threats, proxy attacks, missile programs, and a pattern of hostility from Iran over many years. These are real concerns. The security situation in the Middle East is genuinely complex and genuinely dangerous. But here is the tension, and it is a tension that international law has always struggled with. The line between preemptive self-defense and unlawful aggression is not always clear. And the international community does not always agree on where that line is. What Switzerland is doing is not taking sides on the politics. They're saying, regardless of the reason, the process and the legal framework matter. Because if powerful nations can simply decide on their own when force is justified, without accountability, without international authorization, then the entire system of international law begins to collapse. Switzerland also specifically called for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. This is not a small detail. This goes to the heart of international humanitarian law, sometimes called the laws of war. Even in conflict, there are rules. Hospitals cannot be targeted. Civilian populations cannot be deliberately harmed. Infrastructure that people depend on for water, food, electricity, and medical care must be protected. The history of modern warfare, sadly, is full of cases where these rules were ignored or violated. And every time they are violated, it is ordinary people who pay the price. Families, children, people who had nothing to do with political decisions made in distant capitals. Switzerland's call to protect civilians is a reminder that behind every military strike, there are human beings, and that the measure of any military action is not only whether it achieves a strategic goal, but whether it is conducted in a way that minimizes harm to innocent people. This is a standard that every side in every conflict should be held to, not just some sides. Every side. Switzerland also made a point of saying that its good offices remain available to the parties involved. This phrase, good offices, is a formal diplomatic term. It means Switzerland is offering to serve as a mediator, a facilitator, a neutral space where parties can talk even when direct communication has broken down. This matters enormously right now. When military strikes happen between nations, especially nations as geopolitically significant as the United States, Israel, and Iran, the risk of escalation is real. One strike can lead to a counterstrike. A counterstrike can lead to a broader conflict. A broader conflict can pull in other nations, destabilize entire regions, and create humanitarian disasters that take generations to recover from. Diplomacy is not weakness. Diplomacy is the mechanism by which human beings have learned to resolve disputes without destroying each other. Switzerland's offer to serve as a channel of communication may seem quiet and understated. But in moments like this, quiet and understated diplomacy can be the difference between a contained crisis and a catastrophic escalation. The question is whether the parties involved are willing to use that channel. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture. We are living in a period of significant global stress. The rules-based international order, the system of laws, treaties, and institutions built after World War II, is under pressure from multiple directions. When powerful nations act unilaterally outside of international frameworks, it sends a message to every other nation watching. It says, the rules apply when it is convenient, and not when it is not. That is a dangerous message. Because the rules-based order does not protect powerful nations primarily, they can usually protect themselves. It protects smaller, weaker nations. It protects people without armies. It protects the principle that no country, no matter how powerful, is above the law. Switzerland's statement is a defense of that principle. It is a reminder that the world built these institutions, the United Nations, the Geneva Conventions, international courts, for a reason. And that reason has not gone away. The question every citizen of every country should be asking is, what kind of world do we want to live in? One where disputes are resolved through law, diplomacy, and accountable processes? Or one where the strongest simply do what they can and everyone else accepts it? That is not a rhetorical question. The answer we live with depends on the choices made right now, in moments exactly like this one. Switzerland has spoken. Quietly. Carefully, but clearly. They are alarmed. They are calling for restraint. They are keeping the door open for dialogue. And they are reminding the world that international law exists not as a suggestion, but as a foundation. What happens next is uncertain. Whether the parties involved will step back from the edge, choose diplomacy over escalation, and protect the civilian lives caught in the middle, we do not yet know. But we do know this: the world is watching. And the choices made in the coming days and weeks will shape the international order for years to come. If this video gave you a clearer understanding of what is happening and why it matters, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The more people understand how international law and diplomacy work, the better equipped we all are to demand accountability from those who hold power. Thank you for watching.